Within alternate history, one of the most common scenarios is a British-American war during the American Civil War. While many events are brought up for this possibility, one of the most common is an event known as the Trent Affair, and in this video, we'll be looking at what the Trent Affair actually was. Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, had dispatched 3 envoys to secure British and French recognition as a sovereign nation. Britain and France had maintained their diplomatic relations with the United States following the outbreak of the Civil War, and had recognized the Confederacy as a belligerent power but not a sovereign government. Davis sought to change this by negotiating with these nations for full diplomatic recognition, largely through the use of heavy cotton shipments to these states, something known as King Cotton diplomacy. They figured that the shortage in the textile mills in both Britain and France would force both governments to recognize the nation in return for regular cotton shipments. Official recognition would not only lend credibility to the Confederacy for its bid of independence, but would also pave the way for lucrative trade deals between the powers, and they would force the Union to give up on blockading southern ports, as they lacked the naval arm to fight against the European fleets. Davis hoped that the recent victories against Union troops would make the governments favor the envoys much more. In October of 1861, James Madison and John Slidell, 2 of the diplomats sent, slipped through the U.S. naval blockade and left Charleston, South Carolina for Spanish Cuba. From there, they took passage for England on the Trent. U.S. Captain Wilkes intercepted the Trent on November the 8th, and without permission from Washington, ordered his lieutenant to board and search the ship. The U.S. boarding party took Madison and Slidell and their secretaries as prisoner, but allowed the Trent to depart for England without taking the ship as a prize, which was the original intention of Wilkes. Initial reaction on both sides of the Atlantic to this was strong. The United States publicly celebrated this turn of events as a victory against the Confederacy and a blow to Confederate diplomacy. The British, on the other hand, strongly protested Wilkes' action as illegal and a violation of their neutrality, and demanded the release of the captive Confederate envoys as well as a formal apology. Although British officials continued to advocate a policy of neutrality, they did send over 20,000 regulars to Canada and raise the Canadian militia, as well as send naval reinforcements to the Western Hemisphere, in the event that war did occur. Neither the United States nor Great Britain wanted war, but it was clear that at best, the Trent incident had sparked a major diplomatic disagreement, and at worst, appeared to have pushed Great Britain and the United States towards armed conflict. There was a huge worry that war between these two nations would occur. British India was the only source of saltpeter for the Union for a time, and Britain exported a large amount of weaponry and munitions to the nation as well. The US economy was soon hit by the effects of this. On December the 16th, the actions of the British cabinet reached New York, and the stock exchange fell across the board. On December the 30th, the banks voted 25-15 to suspend specie payments. Banks across the country soon followed them, with only those in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky continuing to redeem in coin. This suspension left the Treasury unable to pay its suppliers, contractors, or the armed forces. The Treasury was thus forced to issue out fiat money known as greenbacks, which is the standard currency of modern day. Thanks to a communication malfunction, the cable containing the early reaction and demands of Britain took almost a month to arrive in Washington. By then, emotions had cooled on both sides and calmer heads prevailed. Nevertheless, the British still expected a response from Abraham Lincoln and continued to empathize that Captain Wilkes had acted without official authorization. The Lincoln administration understood that it would be unwise to risk an armed conflict and moved to smooth things over. The US Minister to Great Britain assured the British that the United States did not want a war and advised President Lincoln and Secretary of State William Seward that they should conform to some of the British demands. On December the 26th, Seward presented an official note summarizing the Lincoln administration's position to Lord Lyons, the British minister to the United States. He defended Wilkes' actions, although he conceded that Wilkes had erred by not seizing the Trent and letting the court affirm the legality of taking the envoys. Nevertheless, they agreed to release the prisoners, and Lyons, under orders from London, accepted the explanation, thereby diffusing the crisis. Ultimately, President Lincoln and Secretary Seward were satisfied with this outcome. However, the Trent Affair confirmed that the British were willing to defend their position of neutrality in the American Civil War. Neither side wanted to reignite old scars, and tempers between the two nations continued to calm as the years went on, and the main point for international Confederate recognition largely died before it started.